Okay, thank you. So, good afternoon. Again, I'm Rita Chitonico, Associate Dean of Research at FIU for the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm also Director of Education for an NSF Center of Excellence that we have from the U.S. National Science Foundation. And it's not the topic for today, but FIU also has a lot of work being done on transforming undergrad and graduate education and new innovative practices that I'd love to talk about another time if we have time for that. But today I'm supposed to talk about the unique challenges that we have in Miami and other parts of South Florida to try to see places for synergy with some of the issues that you are experiencing as well. So for us, one of the biggest challenges is sea level rise. And so I'll be talking to you a little bit about, what our concerns are, and then what Dr. Crowell will talk a little bit more about what are some of the things that we're doing about it. And so I'm supposed to set up the challenges, and he'll talk about some solutions. So as you know, it always feels funny talking about Miami since it's so new and it's so much different than here. But the big thing to emphasize that either smartly or not wisely, we've built so much vulnerable assets on the coastline in Miami, particularly. So it's been ranked by Rockefeller Association as one of the most vulnerable cities in the world based on assets at risk for sea level rise and climate change. So we're trying to look at this from an integrated approach to creating a sustainable South Florida. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of these different components and what we're thinking about and why there's so much vulnerability. But obviously we have to look at global change, sea level rise, more intense storms. We also have a very large urbanization, as we were talking about before, that you also have experiencing, that also gives a lot of vulnerability, but also opportunities for adaptation. I'll talk a little bit about the Everglades, which are, one of these iconic, largest watersheds in the world, and how it's vulnerable, and then, again, what are some of the things that we can do to try to adapt it in the face of what's coming. And then what are some restoration efforts, and how can we really preserve the ecosystem services that we have in our South Florida ecosystem to look for a future that is sustainable. So this is just give you some examples of what we're experiencing, and we call this, well, the local people call it nuisance flooding. The mayor calls it sunny day flooding. So even when it's not raining, there's sea level rising through the city. Even when it's not a high tide, mostly when it's a high tide, but it's happening more and more frequently. It used to be, every month. Now it's like every week probably. So especially when we have major high tides like king tide, which happens just about now, in October. So the city is coming up with some solutions that are, I think, fairly short term, where they've installed these huge pumps to actually keep the area dry during these high tides. But again, they run diesel 24/7. They are actually having some issues with being such a strong pump that they're kind of starting to mix with some of the sewage is getting sucked up into the pumps and stored it into the bay. And so there's issues with that kind of engineered solution that we're going to have to deal with and try to think of some more adaptive ways of dealing with these changes. So this is a U.S. reference, but I'm in Europe. But yeah, so anyway, it's all about how do you make predictions, right? It's how do we decide how to make predictions. And we have a great team of people at Florida International that actually work on trying to look at modeling of all the data that we have to try to predict into the future what's the most likely scenarios. We all know this curve, and we know that human activity is causing us to have these changes, and so how are we going to model them? So basically what we're looking at is the different temperature anomalies that we're seeing, and how do you predict how the changes in temperature are going to impact our sea level rise. And so we know that the changes in temperature are causing the ocean to expand and warm, and so how is that going to be, how can you predict the changes and the lag time? So what they've been really looking at is, so there's a certain level of temperature that commits us to a certain level of sea level rise, and then you can see as it gets higher and And so what I think is the most scary about this whole thing is that we've already committed to a level of sea level rise by how much we've already increased the temperature of the earth. And now trying to predict what's the lag time and how long we have before we're gonna, well, especially in South Florida, we're gonna kind of be gone. And so they're very, I don't know as much about the models as how they conduct them, but actually there's a really beautiful modeling that I'm going to show you that will show you what the most likely predictions are, at least for South Florida. So just to orient you, so the blue part is Lake Okeechobee, and yellow, the yellow arrow is where the kind of the heart of Miami would be or is. And so if you look, and I'll just show you kind of a progression. I didn't do an animation because they never work, but I did a progression, and just to show you kind of what we've already committed to and what the most likely projections are. So this is a 0.1 degree Celsius increase, which we already were committed to in the late 70s. And then the lag time predicted is, you'll see this between 2018 and 2024. As you're going up, I'm not going to tell you everyone, 0.3 degrees we committed to in the 80s, 0.4 by the mid-90s, half a degree, 0.7, so that's where Miami is. So this is where we know that we are already. So this is 0.8 degrees C, which already occurred in the mid-2010s. And again, this sea level rise, we've committed to this, but they don't expect the sea to rise to this level until around 2094. And then just going forward, I thought the most interesting thing is if you look at how this progresses. So 1.5, we're arguing the IPCC whether we should stop at 1.5, or if the world can agree on 2, or where we are. So for us, it's in South Florida, it makes a huge difference. This is 1.5, and Miami is pretty much not really there. And then if you go to 2, this is where we are. And then most drastic, I have to show you, so this is 4. So, yeah. So how do we, these increasing projections, the point is that we have to do something, right? No matter which projection that you look at, there's going to be a huge major impact on the area, and what are we going to do? And again, as I said, as Todd said, we started a Sea Level Solution Center that's really looking at solutions to these things, but I'm supposed to tell you all the things that is the major impacts. So one is, again, sea level rise, impact on the vulnerability of the city. The other is our changing Everglades landscape. As you can imagine, as you know, so the Everglades on the left is what it looked like, before we drained it. And then when they drained it to actually have, the city and have more agricultural lands, we basically made the Everglades much, much smaller. So obviously there's a number of impacts. One is that, the water sources, the Everglades really is a water source for millions of people in Miami and elsewhere. It also has completely changed the whole hydrology of the Everglades. And so we've been working a lot as, and then I should say it also, besides the amount of water, it's also made it very vulnerable to sea level rise. And the reason for this is, there's a number of reasons. One is it's a very porous, shallow limestone that the aquifer is built on, so it's very susceptible to seawater intrusion. There's very thin peat soils because of more evaporation and the drainage. It's completely flat, like compared to here. It's completely flat, we have no topography. So any small changes in rain triggers floods or drought, so it's very, very vulnerable. The biggest thing is really this whole karst aquifer that we have, and so as you have less fresh water pushing down the sea level, seawater can come up, and so it just can infiltrate into the water supply. So besides this, everyone's worried about this tsunami of water coming into their homes for sea level rise, but the most pressing danger really is this whole saltwater intrusion and the lack of fresh water supply for the area. And so this is just an example of, I think we talked about something before, what's the population? It's around 5.5 to 6 million people in the area. And so as you can see, the water demand just is going up and up. And so we have to do something to be able to supply this fresh water. Again, I said we have these pumps, but there's going to have to be other solutions that we start thinking about. water supply now. And so I think, it's happening now. We really have to do something more immediately. Okay. So the last, I think, issue I wanted to talk about is, and I think a comparison to your scenarios in the cities that we're talking about, Rome, Florence, and other European cities, are these coastal rivers and their vulnerability to these changes in the environment. And again, the biggest things we're looking at are agricultural impacts on land use, the land use towards agriculture, more industrialization and more urbanization. And so we're already seeing impacts on streams, and there's a number of different impacts. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's the physical elements, there's the biological components, there's also the physical integrity of the channels or the streams, and then a whole difference in the ecology, right? There's more exotic species coming in, replacing the natives. There's also changes in the whole ecosystem processes. So in terms of Miami River, just to give you an idea of the scale of the river, as you can imagine, the water starts out as the Everglades and comes out by Brickell Point, which this is just an observation of a picture of what that looks like. And again, it's like the changes in the river, obviously is blue, and let me show you a little better. So you can look and see all the development around the river. Obviously, it's having a huge impact on the ecosystem. The green is ag, and then there's commercial and residential. So there's a huge impact on the river and the river ecosystem. And the biggest thing that we're finding, and I thought this was something that also we talked about a few days ago, and this is kind of small, but this is actually looking at what are some of the pollutants and contaminants and pharmaceuticals that we're finding in the river, which is obviously an impact on the people there, and we have to be very cognizant of measuring these and actually trying to figure out how to remediate to make it a safe place for people to look at, to live around. The other thing I want to point out is one of the things that we're also working at on the right-hand side is trying to look at indicators of human impacts, not just things that could give you an early warning system that there might be a problem. So we have this very, I think Tal will talk about this more, we have a very amazing lab that looks at ecotoxicology, and they can measure everything that you can possibly think of, and they're also developing methods for unknowns, whatever, to look at, how do we measure this? And so two things that they've been doing that I think are really interesting in terms of how do you look at human impacts before there's an issue, is they track Splenda, which is an unnatural or artificial sweetener that doesn't break down. So it only comes from human impact. So if you see that there, you know that you might want to measure for other things like coliform or other things like that that could be an impact. They also use caffeine as another indicator that there is human impact in that area that you should further look at. So even though I'm presenting all the dire things, we are trying to look at, as again, a really integrated approach to how do you look at adapting to some of these issues and actually trying to look ahead to see what we can do ahead of time to make sure there's not that much impact. And again, the motivation is if the people have been trying to look at, I think, were you an economist? Somebody was an economist. Is that trying to look at how do you value ecosystem services, right? And how do you decide, how do you weigh one against the other? But the biggest thing is, that we have this huge ecosystem value that we need to protect. And just one example, and then I guess Todd will talk about it a little bit more, some of the things we're doing. As I mentioned, we have this Center for Aquatic Chemistry and the Environment that's was funded again by the National Science Foundation, and we're trying to take a really integrated, very interdisciplinary approach to how do you try to rectify the situation. And so you have to go all the way from how do you detect and identify potential contaminants in this situation. How do you look at fate and transport? Are they transformed? Can you measure what they are, where they're going, and then what they're becoming in the environment? And then really looking at how does that impact the ecosystem? How does it impact, public health? And finally, how do you visualize these results to policymakers and the public to understand the impacts and actually what you can do about it? So I'm in charge of the education component of this, really trying to get students involved and understanding these concepts and then translating them into information that policymakers could use to actually make decisions. So that, thank you, and taking the questions.
Thanks a lot, Rita. Really interesting presentation. Is anyone need to ask something? Comments?
I'll talk about all the positive things.
Maybe more discussion later also after the presentation. Because I have a few, but we'll do this later.
Okay.
So then we don't interrupt it, okay? So, Elena, very sheet you can go on video.
So good afternoon, and my name is Elena Bresci, and I'm from University of Florence. I want to thank you again, Fabio Castelli, first of all, because he suggests my name, and also the organization for having invited me. So I will talk about water harvesting as water security, and the outline will be this one. So I will talk just a little bit on main concept related with water harvesting. I'll give some examples on structures that we have been involved in constructions in some areas, and the research hotspot for discussion later, and a little presentation of the water harvesting lab that has been constituted at the University of Florence, in particular at the department to which I belong. I will start with the main concept from this picture, that is the sub-Saharan water balance, and the starting point is the fact that all the great portion of rainfall that we may have even in arid and semi-arid areas is going to be lost, so, and it is not available for growing crops. So this is going to affect very much rain-fed agriculture, and then we have to try to find solutions to the fact that from 50 to 70% of rainfall is not available. Why? Because it evaporates, partly, and partly because it becomes a surface runoff. Then we can propose some interventions that could be at different level of scale, spatial scales, for not obviously for reducing evaporation, not because it is atmospheric, related atmospheric variables, but for sure we can collect runoff for productive use. We can improve, so put in action some interventions that can infiltrate or can increase the amount of water that is going to be infiltrated into the soil, and then the soil itself will be the storage systems, and then it would be much more available for crops or either for other uses. So if we accept the definition of water harvesting proposed by Owes, it can be defined as the process of concentration, precipitation through runoff, and storing it for beneficial use. And obviously, if we are dealing with cropping systems, for sure, a water harvesting system will be can propose some kind of solution that can stabilize the water availability to the crop over a longer period of time. So the principle is that one, so we have an area that is called a catchment, where the runoff is produced. Then we will have the storage system, and from the storage system, this can be diverted into some cultivated areas. So runoff scale can be different. So we will have, for example, catchment scale, so we will have the river flow, and then we will have, for example, spade irrigation. The storage medium could be surface or subsurface. So regarding to surface, we have some reservoirs, so it would be tanks or dams. And subsurface, obviously, it is soil mainly. Water harvesting can be classified into many boxes, as you can see here. So we will have a water in air, overland flow, and groundwater. I'm not talking obviously about all of them, only the one that has these red boxes. So water in air means fog harvesting. So I will show you some examples of how we can block and how we can harvest fog and then utilize the water that is coming from fog for other uses. If we consider the water harvesting as groundwater, we can block the groundwater circulation through groundwater dams. So we can rise the water table and then increase the possibility of having shallow wells. So it's much easier to access water, groundwater. We will have has overland flow floodwater harvesting, then spade irrigation, so it will be mainly related with water that is already in a river, so it has undergone the transformation from rainfall into runoff, and we are using the discharge into, when it is present, obviously in ephemeral rivers, for irrigating some areas that later on can be cultivated. And another example will be related with the rooftop harvesting. So I will show you in rural areas, but obviously rooftop harvesting can be a solution also in urban areas, and we have a lot of examples on that. Here are some examples of rainwater harvesting interventions divided into macro catchment and micro catchment. And the difference is which is the area in the dimension of the area from which we are going to harvest the runoff. So we will have some examples later on. And the first one is the fog water harvesting. Here you can see on the left-hand side the tree in a desert area. So we are in the Lomas of Mejia. We are 200 kilometers far from south of Arequipa. And this is the starting point of fog water harvesting. What means? Means that in this case we have a tree that through its branches can collect the advection fog, and the droplets of the fog can increase their dimensions and then can be able to rain due to gravity under the crown projection. So what we see here is that everything is without vegetation, but the circle that is under the tree is green. So it means that the branches are the ones that are responsible for dripping. So from this concept, we can harvest the fog, advection fog, through the use of meshes. So these are shading meshes in a double layers. And atrapanieblas, so it means fog collectors, has been put in some areas. Then we had the experience in Peru. And we can be able then to collect a lot of liters of water and being stored in reservoir, and then make it usable after some time. In our project, we considered to revegetation of some areas, but it can be utilized for domestic use and also for domestic use. So the conditions that we must have for proposing fog water harvesting, and obviously it is not only in Peru, but on the other side we can see we experience in mainly each continent. We must have advection fog, so that are a particular type of fog. We need a prevailing wind, and in particular horizontal, and we need a ridgeline mounting, and then the water is going to be, the advection fog is going to be pushed toward these meshes, and then the water can be collected. Obviously, we have to evaluate the sites, the best sites, so in general, we are using the standard fog collectors that are 1 square meter meshes that are able to identify which are the best site for putting some these systems. Another example is the spade irrigation. So we had, I had some students that went to Ethiopia for being involved in a project, and they, in particular Giulio is here, and he has been involved for actually twice for trying to improve the diversions for diverting water from the body. And here you can see the problems of being resistant for the diversion, because you can see here that diversion is not anymore there. So we have on the left-hand side the before flooding and after flooding, and the channel was present at the beginning, but after the floods, nothing is there. Another example is on some research that has been done on the ecosystem services in two different basins that underwent different soil water management conservation interventions. So we had the Guguf basin that didn't have any kind of managing, and the Guguf had these managing soil water interventions, and the other basin didn't have anything. And with the participatory approach, in particular through semi-structured interviews, we have the possibility of identifying which were the ecosystem services that got benefits from the presence of these soil water conservation systems. Sand dams. Sand dams is another intervention that belongs to water harvesting, and in particular it is a dam that is going to be created in a valley, and after some floods it is going to be filled with the sediments, and these sediments represent the porous medium for creating an artificial aquifer. So what it means is that we have the possibility of accessing water through wells, shallow wells, and people have the possibility of going nearby where this artificial aquifer is going to be created, and maybe not walk too much for having water. Another is the underground dam. Underground dam is a dam, but it is going to reach the unpermeable layer and interrupt with this dam. We are going to interrupt the aquifer movement, and then we are able to rising up the water table. And in the same way, we can access much easier the water. Here are some examples in Niger and half moons and stone lines that belongs to micro water harvesting systems. So these are more interventions that are related with soil conservation management, that are able to improve the soil water holding capacity and establish conditions of better water content for cropping. The last example is rooftop harvestings. We had experiences in Guatemala and in very arid areas where we proposed the utilization of rooftop water harvesting. So the rainfall was collected from the roof, and some basin, some little reservoir were created and make them impermeable, and people can access this water from this little basin with a very simple pump that is called EMAS pump. It is a manual pump, and then they can really access the water even when we are not in the rainy season. So some advantages can be seen here. These are only some, obviously. What is applied for food security? It can reduce soil erosion because we are not letting water to run off or reduce the amount of runoff. We can cope with extreme events, both too much water or not enough water, so flooding and dry spells. We can have the possibility of recharging shallow aquifer, and this is obviously an advantage for accessing water. And also ecosystem restoration. We don't have only advantages, but we have also disadvantages. And the main disadvantage is related on rainfall, because obviously everything is driven by rainfall. Rainfall, that is any particular rainfall characteristics in terms of amount, distribution, and then variability. So the unpredictability that characterizes rainfall is the limiting, let's say, factor that can limit the use. The water supply that we may derive from water harvesting application can be limited by the storage capacity, design, and cost for storage. We can have also some kind of effects on ecosystems of water. So, for example, the floodwater diversion. We are not now ready yet for trying to identify a particular repartition of amount of water that we want to divert and what we want to release to live in the valley. So this could be can induce some problems on which are the ecosystem services that are downstream, obviously, of the section of where the diversion is located. And also, some problems may arise related on water amount, so conflicts related to water because of these structures. Research hotspots, so this will be, and I hope so, that will be some points on which we can discuss later on. And for example, for the trade-off of water harvesting intensification, we can pose some questions. And for example, water harvesting in headwaters can reduce water availability in tailwaters. So how much? How different are the impacts for different climatic areas? So how can we measure the problems or the effect that this kind of intensification may have? And the same on the ecosystem services. How can we evaluate the benefits or the disadvantages on the ecosystem services, for example, groundwater recharge or landscape restoration? So we should try to find some indicators and some measurable indicators for trying to quantify. And the other hotspot on which I believe very much is the increase in research on the ephemeral rivers hydrology. Since we said that rainfall is the first leading variable, but this has also to be translated into runoff. So how can we estimate the runoff as a function of rainfall? So provisional systems, for example, integrated water management, conjunctive water use, so the relations that we may have from surface water and groundwater in a valley that obviously some interconnections are present, and runoff rainfall runoff modeling. And the other one is related to the management of water harvesting. So how to insert water harvesting in coral landscape and urban planning in a global north and global south. And I will conclude with this slide. So with this, the group on which I am. So the water harvesting lab, we are not too many, so I would like to increase. Obviously, we don't have to be only actually, here we are only jazz up stuff, so it's, I would like really to open the possibility to have, as I said before, the possibility of working together, because I think it is an interesting subject and really a lot have to be done on that in research. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Elena. Really interesting. I think that also what an interesting topic. It's well correlated with what we are developing, supporting the next presentation. And thanks, Fabio, for introducing Elena to us. I think it's a very good match. So we'll do the discussion and other comments later. I give the floor to Orazio Carpenzano. My pleasure to Orazio presenting us the Coda della Cometa. Nell'English, Orazio, Coda della Cometa is no. There's no translation for Coda della Cometa. Thank you, Orazio.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Very nice to meet you and listen to your interesting presentation. I will talk about the project of a new water landscape in the Roman Comet Tail. Since 2012, the Department of Architecture and Project of Sapienza University of Rome, DIAP, is involved in several studies on landscape, economic and environmental scenarios on a topic named Coda della Cometa, Comet Tail. The Comet Tail area is located southwest of Rome. The area is strongly influenced by the presence of water since its average altitude is almost at the sea level. The area has been a marshland until 1884. There were the two big ponds of Ostia and Maccarese, and some wetlands working as a conjunction between the Tiber River, fresh waters, and the Tirreno, sea salt waters. In the past, there were also two Roman villages, Ostia Antica and Portus. Both important ports areas. Nowadays, Portus and Ostia Antica are archaeological sites of great interest, as you know. The landscape of the Comet Tail has been transformed during the large bonfires of 1884 and 1935, allowing to avoid the spread of malaria and to obtain new agricultural land. The economic and demographic boom of the 16th has further transformed this area. In fact, many abusive homes have been built, which have considerably increased the urban blood and the related flood risk. The first result of the research work been announced with the Roma 2025 project, exhibit at the Maxi Museum of Contemporary Art and Architecture in Rome. The exhibition at Maxi presented a first series of studies in which water had the task of redesigning a new urban scenario from the to use and aesthetic point of view. The project, after the Roma 2025 experience, the Department of Architecture and Project of Sapienza University continued its research on the area of the comet tail. The work is still in progress with the technical and scientific advice of Professor Fernando Nardi from University of Forense of Perugia and Professor Giovanni De Marinis from the University of Cassino and Southern Lazio. Currently, the research assumes a series of a morphological reconfiguration of the comet tail territory in order to maintain the hydrological balance of the area. Our current interest is to ensure protection against floods caused by extreme rainfalls. The guiding principle of the whole operation is to need to give space to water. This means restoring a dynamic balance between the fixed elements of urbanization and the variables ones of the nature. At the same time, giving space to water means to guarantee the human safety and the environmental protection. Nowadays, the comet tail doesn't give the water enough space to drain and to be accumulated as suffering. The problem is that the bonfires have been confessed for agricultural area that today has become a real city. For this reason, in our research, the water is also a strategic role in the project. The given space to water reduces the space for the abusive city and redesign the relationship between city and countryside. With this goal, weather plays a structural role. It organizes the new territorial balance and creates a landscape that changes its aesthetics and its use to varying season. In conclusion, the adopted strategies in our project are essentially four. The first, throughout the first strategy, we propose the expand the reclamation canals to turn them into pools for rainwater collection. The canal size is increased where possible from 4-5 meters to 7-10 meters, especially into the area of the Great Bend of the river of the Tiber River, which becomes a strategic place for the storage and disposal of rainwater. Water control is introduced to a network of canals which resize and distribute rainwater. This kind of intervention is very important because we expect to put cycle and pedestrian path beside the channels In this way, the structure of the channels also becomes the structure of the soft mobility. Second, the second strategy proposed the creation of basins that collect water from the canals and the construction of a new water courses. In particular, we propose to create two large linear tanks, one in the area of the Great Beam area, and one below the Casal Palocco area, capable of combining water flows from the most populated areas. The third mode works outside the urban area and involves the creation of larger basins which, if needed, collect the rainwater at the borders of the urban areas. The basins we are planning on will be partly natural areas, partly anthropized, and they are supposed to be important components of the new wet landscape with the flora and fauna. Obviously, the strategy describes about is used for continuous urban fabric where it is possible to put in a basin. The last strategy involves demolition, which focuses on areas with higher flood risk, specifically on the mouth of the Tiber River, where there are many abusive homes built without any urbanistic criteria, which are constantly subject by flooding. In conclusion, and you can see in the slide the part, the yellow. In conclusion, the aim of the research is to design the Cometel water system with two proposals. The first one is ensuring the security of the area. The second one is drawing a new landscape, thus through water, bending the city to nature. The underlying principle is to identify new territorial balances, starting from mediation between nature forms and art forms, unifying the design of architecture, engineering and landscape within a single strategy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Orazio. I think that it's very...
Sorry for my English, but I studied in a very bad school.
I think it was perfect. Yeah. But now you're going to also share with all of you, but with Fabio and Todd, but maybe in particular about the ideas shared with all of you about this Roma, Ieni, but in general, coast of Italy and Costa USA. Since we are, more than in time, we are like, I will take 2 minutes if you don't mind, because my presentation will be a different topic, but I would like to make a link now. Can I have what's the number 4? Can you go back on number 4? Just to share 2 ideas. I won't take more time than really 1 minute. And I'm sure Fabio has many ideas about when we talk about relocation and some water storage.
Yes.
I will just give you 2 comments. The darker shadow in things like orange, like brown, is mainly associated to the original coastline of Italy. And that's for us the end of the gravity control zone, where water is fluxing for the fluvial system with energy flowing. After that, This is the reclamation of Ostia Antica, of Ostia. So there was dredge in the 19th century, and then in the 19th century, the story of the Arena Nicola. So they did this for agricultural purposes, for drying the land for agriculture, for living, not for living like now. Yesterday we thought it's a mass of illegal settlements, slums, so that bore with the fishery, and it's completely not well planned. I know it's illegally planned, but it's not illegal, but it's original. So that's the story, the cultural also part. So, and this line is way behind the actual coastline. Okay? If you see also the two basins on the right and the left, these are the last two basins actually started for the Tiber River Authority, because they are the last two Ortonian basins. As you see, the shape really looks like a river. The other, it was designed by the land reclamation people that could design any like you want. You dredge, and the slope there is no slope. Actually, the water authority, Consorzio Bonifica, it can change the slope of the channel just moving the gate. So you can do, it's a 1 meter, is a huge gradient for there. So I was stop my comment and should not understand that it's energy control system from now on that you can manage as you want. Last comment, even if I was on my project, I have to say and stress this fact, because after the Tiber River Management Plan that you need to design interventions, the Tiber River Authority proposed green solutions, was my idea, about controlling the water upstream in different ways. Any water control system, but not that was actually designed by other entities, I won't say the names, because the request of money to the government for flood risk management of the area is 1.1 million for redesigning the channel, removing the culverts, and doing hydraulic engineer. I'm a hydraulic engineer. I would be happy to have $1 billion for this, but I have the feeling the billion will never come, the area will never be safe, and I don't think it will be the solution for that area. I won't say which other solution is the goal of the agreement. I think that I have $1 billion, and with Orazio and all of you, flexibility, because when you talk about relocation, it's something that is not easy, almost impossible immediately, but if you have like free hands, I won't ever do great solutions by others so that we, and again, gravity control energy, Miami is a completely different climate, so it will be much better experience for us to design this and having the force of the Miami colleagues supporting us in other solutions that Miami can also take advantage of. So just a comment, sorry, long comment, but I wanted to, and with Orazio we are working on this in our research, and I want to share this with you, so hopefully it will be journal publication soon, and that's my promise with Orazio. We'll do that very soon. Okay, thank you, Orazio.
Thank you
so much.
Angela?
Okay, so I apologize with the colleagues from Miami. I'm using some slides that I already used in Miami. And some others. Okay. I'm going to leave them. Yes. Don't pretend you remember. Just in case. And also, my presentation is not going to focus on international cases, but in the past few years we have been, as a group and also as a UNESCO chair, so much stress about the Firenze case that has been sitting there with the essentially unchanged risk for almost 50 years. And we're putting a lot of efforts with authorities to have sort of changing pace. Okay, so we focus on this specific case. On the other hand, I believe that in such cases where a problem sits there unsolved, it means that you look for solutions elsewhere to confront with situations like the Miami case. Here we have an ancient city flooded by rivers. In Miami we have a new city flooded by sea. But I believe that confronting this kind of distant cases, you can find new solutions that you don't find in 50 years. That's why in focus, I think it's useful to focus on very, very distant cases. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Why art cities are so peculiar and why some cases have been solved related to what I just said. For example, in Venice, big money in the big project of Moses. Why? Probably this is similar to Miami. It happens every year, okay? It's there, it's evident. All the money you put there, you immediately see the advantage. Or recent cases, Prague and Dresden in 2002 actually give birth of the very widely used flood directive in Europe. Or after Katrina, they improved policy on defense from floods. White Front is lagging behind. It doesn't belong to any of this. Okay? The last dramatic flood was almost 50 years ago, and people tend to forget. Okay? But even more important is what is the origin and what are peculiar for art cities. Okay? The origin of the risk. This is not an art city. Okay? I'm showing this picture because it's very effective in visualization. I use this picture a lot with students. This is a valley in Tuscany, and you see a river that I cut in half in a bed. Okay? This area was flooded in 2011. Okay? Now try to imagine how it's done the right part of the river that is missing. Okay? Try to visualize that. Imagine. Okay. This is the situation. Okay? The right part of the river is not there. There is something else. Okay? And this is too bad. This is a kind of modern situation. This is a 90s urbanization. But the origin of flood risk in Firenze is not different. The problem is that the origin of the risk is very similar, but it comes from the Middle Age. And to make a long story short, you can't relocate what was built in the Middle Age. Okay? So this is very, okay, these are details on how the city evolved actually around an ancient levee that was built to connect the old Roman settlement that they were aware of the flooding of the river to connect to the port that was here. Then this riverbank became in Middle Age the site for a sort of fortress near the river. And from there the city developed with this clear restriction of the river. Okay, where Ponte Vecchio is, where all the main historic buildings are. Okay? And in fact, there are very few historic records of important floodings before that age. And since then, okay, we had 57 flood events of the city, with 8 of them classified as exceptional, and the major 2 were the last one and the one that I said we shared with Rome. I don't know if it's Francesco. And we had all sorts of that may be interesting also from a cultural point of view. We can't have time to discuss how along during time the visualization of the perception of floods has changed also in art history. Okay? Tomorrow, if you will walk through downtown Firenze, there is still a lot of watermarks around the city. Okay? And the most probably important one is this one, where we have all watermarks. Okay, along this column where you see that the 16 was the highest one and the second one is the one I mentioned. Too bad is how it's important to be aware that memory needs to be kept alive. Why I put this mark in a drawing and not in a picture? Because you can see in the restoration of this building, the original mark has been cancelled. But all over the city, you will see many of at least of the 1966 ones. So coming to more topics, flood risk in art cities has implications also for how you evaluate risk. Okay? We have more or less well-established means to precisely evaluate risk for example, for many disabled goods and activities. In a sense, also, we have big advancement in risk for people. What I say is art cities, in particular cities like Firenze, where the main assets at risk are artworks. Artworks are not protected by constitution as each one is equal. It's not enough to count them, okay? It's not like human life that each human life from the right point of view is equal to the other. Artwork is not. Okay? When you have in a city like Firenze, thousands of art pieces, you can't just say, I need to protect everything with the same care. Okay? And this is a very specific and still debated issue on how you evaluate risk for something that is not monetizable, but counting them is not just enough. Some steps we are doing anyway, at least from the counting of them. Of course, we are working quite effectively with that in cooperation with the Ministry of Culture and Art. I always remember the exact acronym of the ministry. For example, this is a proof of how many buildings containing artworks or buildings that are both cultural heritage per se are at flood risk in Italy. And as you estimate the usually monetary sense, the monetary loss in terms of flood risk, in terms of money loss per year, you can translate just counting the number of artworks, this concept, in terms of risk for the artworks. And you can see that, you have areas where you can lose almost 1% per year for the artworks with the current situation risk. Okay, but of course, this also, you don't have to forget about, the risk for people, and at least in the typical urban fabrics of cities like Firenze or many Italian cities has been proved that I would say 70% of casualty during floods comes from a misuse of vehicles, of private vehicles. It is a very hot spot of attention. And here, for example, so even in case of severe pluvial flooding, it's not just flooding from the river, you can have areas of the urban fabric where you have very high concentration of high risk for pedestrian vehicles, even from simple pluvial flooding. Okay? The problem of climate change, how this interacts with this environment. Okay? We are still debating a lot with respect to this kind of flooding event, what is the true meaning of the true effect of climate change. You mentioned, of course, of effect of climate change like sea level rise, where there is no doubt about it. Effect of climate change on very extreme rainfall is still a lot of debating. For example, there are, of course, IPCC scenario that this projection of a dependence on the regions, you may have some increase, for example, of the expected value of the maximum yearly rainfall, which is not the rainfall we are worried about. When I mean extreme rainfall, I mean rainfall corresponding to the current interval of 100 years, 200 years, 500 years. First of all, what is the meaning of climate? When you think of when you talk about something that may happen every 500 years. Okay? As a matter of fact, when you go to, for example, at least in the Mediterranean region, to use regular, usual time series analysis on rainfall extreme, very rarely you have evidences of trends, of significant trends. On the other hand, these days have been a lot involved in the post-evaluation of a concentrated flood event in the city of Livorno, where 9 people were killed, okay, by an intense storm. And here you have the accumulation of the equivalent to 100 years rainfall and the rainfall that fall during 3 hours, more or less. It's not Houston, okay? I know that Houston, it was how much? 1,500 millimeters, right? But it was concentrated in 3 hours, and if you compute the recurrency of this event, you can see visually compared to the 200 one, you wait like 5,000 years, 6,000 years. So you have projection, evidences, perception, they are not that agreement. There are, of course, within, not, I wouldn't say in a given trend, but of course there is evidence of climate that, however, is changing. Okay? So there are studies and proposals to, for example, take an account of non-stationarity estimation of recurrence interval, or introducing non-stationarity in the design criteria. What I'm debating a lot now, for example, with local and regional governments, is try to introduce these kinds of concepts in remodeling or redesign of a new defense system, where if the obvious implication of a changing climate is that one time scale, the 200 years, is not more enough. You have to introduce a second time scale. What is the lifespan of that project? How often can I reevaluate the effectiveness of this project? But it of course has a lot of implication in regulation, management practices, ongoing works that needs to be revisited, and this sort of hot topics as well. On the other hand, of course, the changing climate has also some implication on weakening what has been traditionally sort of sharp distinction between structural and non-structural approaches. Okay? In Italy, you say, okay, optimal way of managing flood risk is you go up to the recurrence interval of 1/200 with structural measures, and then the remaining risk you manage with no structural method, alarm system, relocation, so forth. In a changing climate, this is somehow much more uncertain. So you need to develop more integrated strategies among the two. Okay? Adaptation of structural differences has usually limited possibilities, especially in a fragile and rigid territory like Italy. So this is posing much more focus in improving the alerting and damage reduction system rather than on the adaptation of structural measures. But, so you need to take full advantage of new opportunities like, ecosystem services, resilience, nature-based solution, a lot of new approaches. But again, skipping this, you know what I'm talking about. How do we deal with that in a city like Firenze? Okay? This is a provocative picture where a fake carpet of grass was put in the main cathedral square. Okay? Well, of course, you can't imagine approaching a reurbanization of the downtown Florence as a provocative proof. This past few years, you have a lot of traffic jam in Firenze because we are building new tramline systems, okay? New tramline infrastructures. This is the tramline infrastructure in the suburbs of Firenze, okay? Where you try to implement in the sense of a green infrastructure, improving the absorption of rainwater where you can. This is 2 days ago downtown Firenze. It's just, even a new infrastructure is just a slab of concrete, no attention to drainage. Okay? These are the rigidity of an art city. I don't know if it can be corrected in time or not, but it's again a point of discussion. So the focus on alerting system, okay? This year come more the difference between the case of something that can be flooded from sea level rise, where your forecast prediction are pretty strong, or cases where you have fast responding basins, where your predicting capability starting from the meteorological prediction at the end comes in a sense with a standard ensemble prediction also in terms of flood wave. And decision maker has a lot of difficulties in using this kind of prediction. So if an area of research we are working now is in a synthetic term, switching from ensemble prediction in the sense of hydrologic prediction to an ensemble damage. In a sense, to have a risk evaluation in real time to give as a support decision system to the decision maker. Before giving an alert that in certain situations may be very frequent in time according to this ensemble of prediction, you need to have the capability to actually evaluate in real time what will be the outcomes of a missed alarm or a not given one. Okay? Given the situation, there is a lot of course, again, in terms of focuses on the effectiveness of our system. Here is the picture of a recent case you may know, the same flood in 2016. I think it was one of the first successful experiment of moving in real time a huge number of art pieces from the Louvre Museum. Okay? And we have, given the yet impossibility to properly defend the area of downtown Firenze from flooding, of course we are developing this kind of plan also for Firenze. This is a similar map from the previous one, where rather than plotting the number of artworks at risk, we can also evaluate how many people, how many teams, trained teams you need to put in the field in real time in case of an alarm, usually to move artworks from one floor to upper floors. There are some peculiar cases. For example, the university ancient book library. Okay, this is a partially at the ground and partially in the underground floor. And the estimated numbers of people you would need to move all the ancient book, the one you don't want to be damaged, is 200 teams of 3 people each. Okay, so that's still some specific unsolved problems. Okay, so conclusion. My conclusion is that ancient history of our city has often a distinct role in the original risk, but these are rigidity and diminish a lot the resilience of the system, because it's something you don't want to touch that much, you don't want to modify that much. Okay, so this partly exacerbates the coexistence also with fragile cultural landscape. Firenze is not just downtown, it's an entire cultural landscape that you have difficulties to somehow modify with respect to his actual I think that Ramanzano can say a lot about that. Okay? And together with uncertainty and a changing climate, the last mile of civil protection is becoming as evident as the weakest part. Okay? How you can effectively reach people, protect something that you couldn't protect by usual structural intervention. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Fabio. Thanks a lot. Okay, so Claudio, you want to say?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you all, everybody who presented today. It's a great sharing of information, of interest. There's so many common themes. It's very easy to see almost an unlimited amount of collaboration and joint projects we could work with. What I'm going to do is just give you a brief overview of sort of what our institute is, similar to Warredoc, so that you can see some of the opportunities, perhaps, some of the programs that we could use jointly in joint projects. So the institute has only been around for 2 years. We built this over the last couple of years with the idea that we needed to advance science to address complex water and environmental issues, but we needed a very much an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach to being able to do this, and more importantly, we had to be able to effectively communicate it to the people who actually it matters most to. And so this is our sort of vision and mission. The Institute now is 105 faculty members, from engineering, architecture, you name it. We cross virtually every college except medicine, and I'm now working on a collaboration with our public health folks over there as well. We have 235 graduate students, scientific technicians, and staff associated with the Institute. So we're a pretty large entity that sort of looks at everything we do associated with water. This is the architecture of the Institute. So we have 3 major programs: the Marine program, the Marine Center, the Sea Level Solutions Center, and then this Southeast Environmental Research Center, and then we have these cross-cutting programs. And Maria gave you a nice overview of just a small snippet of the things that she and her team have done in terms of the international program. So I just want to go through and give you some examples of the kinds of things that we do across the Institute, sort of center by center. Our Marine Center hosts the only underwater living laboratory in the world, Aquarius. So this is basically a submarine the size of a bus that's anchored in a coral reef about 2 kilometers off the coast of Florida in the Keys. It allows people to live for up to 30 days or a month without ever surfacing. So if any of you are divers, what you know is that if you don't have to surface and don't have to worry about nitrogen, you can make 8, 10, 12 dives a day. So in terms of understanding coral reef ecology, sharks, whatever it is, this is an amazing facility. Recently, Jacques Cousteau's grandson came and lived in there for 31 days to break his grandfather's record of 30 days. Lived in a different facility. What's important about this is if you have folks who have a need for scientific diving certificates or training in sort of extreme diving, we offer all of that. So for your marine science folks, please pass the word that we basically offer every kind of diving course that's imaginable through the Institute. So that's just a resource to have. We have folks that sort of look at the epigenetics, again, looking for early warning indicators of things like red tide, some of the algal blooms, some of the issues that you may have with runoff and pollution. Of course, our waters are much warmer than yours, so you're not susceptible to some of these things, but we're working on cutting-edge technologies to try to predict when we might have life-threatening, or at least human health-threatening outbreaks of these various kinds of algal blooms. And so we've got sort of cutting-edge research. We've got a group of folks who are looking for natural products for the use for biomedical relevance, and so we're looking at all forms of algae and corals and trying to understand, whether there are some useful kinds of compounds that could be incorporated into various kinds of medicinal things. We have a group that is sort of working on cutting edge autonomous vehicle development. So this is a vehicle that doesn't really drive itself. You have to stand on the shore or be on a boat to drive it, but it's equipped with an amazing array of equipment, including LiDAR, radar, sonar, and it has the ability, from a perspective of an ancient place like Rome, it has the ability to map at very fine scales underwater archaeological important areas. And And the sophistication of this stuff, for those of you who know biological systems, the machinery, the sensors on this are so sensitive that we can actually see zooplankton, individual zooplankton in the water column. So if you can see zooplankton, you can imagine what else you can see. So there's a crab trap that somebody left. It's sort of been overgrown by algae. There's a 50-gallon drum that somebody dumped off of a ship somewhere. So if you can see that level of stuff, I can imagine you can see some pretty important and interesting archaeological things. And so that's it. And the other thing about this is we pack it up in a box and we ship it places. So this thing is pretty small, and we actually ship. So far we've sent it to Alaska, we've sent it to Louisiana, so it can actually be transported from place to place. The Sea Level Solution Center is one of our newest centers. Again, it is aimed very much at the notion of applying all the basic knowledge we have, but solving really real-world problems. And I just love Fabio's presentation because it puts a whole different perspective on things. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Again, it's a university-wide group of folks, and it's really about sort of trying to bring the best science and data to the benefit of society. We look at all kinds of adaptation and mitigation strategies. There's students at the bottom are building artificial oyster reef beds to try to protect some of our archaeological areas. We have a group of architects who are trying to re-envision cities like Miami and basically ask the question, how do we retrofit or how do we build for the future adaptive and sustainable buildings? And I think Fabio, you guys have so much to teach Miami because you are built in. You can't really move anymore. You've got all of these historic and archaeological things. Miami is only 100 and something years old, and yet we still classify some of the early cracker buildings, the early colonizers of Florida who built wooden houses in the 20s. We classify those as culturally important historic buildings. We have entered into a conversation with folks on Miami Beach especially. Do we move these buildings? Do we try to preserve them in place? What is it that we're going to do with these buildings? We have the luxury, I think, of making decisions of moving the very few things that matter to us historically somewhere else while you don't. And it would be nice for people to hear your story of if you don't act pretty soon, you're stuck like you are, right? And so I think that should be a really important conversation we have in the near future. We actually have been holding meetings with residents and the county commissioners and the mayors to talk about changing the zoning laws to try to make it so that people can't build us in any longer. I mean, we don't really care that much about the billionaires who want to put a $200 million building up, and they don't care if it gets flooded or not. They'll just build another one. That's not my problem. Right? My problem are the people who have lived there for 60 or 70 years who aren't high income and are sort of surrounded by sort of all of this vulnerability. And so that's one of the things we think a lot about. But Hinda Sin is in our architect program, and she thinks a whole lot about sort of how we adapt the Miami area and cities in general in terms of either new construction or retrofitting old construction, and then the same kinds of things you guys, a lot of you have been talking about, how do we build in defense mechanisms, especially if we can use green defense mechanisms, if we can use the natural things. Sergio had to leave, but when he was giving his talk about this magnificent island, I was looking online and translating everything into English so that I could understand what he was talking about. And I noticed that you guys had a photo contest so that you could sort of tell the story of the lake and the island. And just coincidentally, last week, we did the same thing. We held a photo contest down in the Florida Keys. We had what is called a King Tide Day. So, the Earth and the Moon and the Sun get sort of in a straight line and they're really high tides. We use that as a way to say, this is what it's going to look like in 20 years. Not just once or twice every 6 months, but this is going to be every single day, given the current rates of sea level rise. So we try to use that as a teaching moment for everybody so that they can envision what this future is going to look like. And we too had a photo contest to see who could capture the vulnerability and you know, the reality of the future of what things are going to look like in Florida. So I'm sorry Sergio isn't here. He asked me to sort of think about some collaborations with his group and stuff like that, and I think there's some very interesting things we can do. We do a lot of the water quality monitoring and help a lot of the agencies associated. Rita told you about the Miami River situation and all the water that sort of runs from the inland to the coast. So my guys are responsible for sort of trying to help the cities and municipalities, the islands, understand what the real water quality issues are, but more than just understand them, how are we going to remediate them? How are we going to empower the citizens to collect the data themselves so that they can decide, you know, what they think is important and how they're going to manage their own sort of water quality issues. And so we do a whole lot about that stuff. One of our newest and I think most exciting collaborations is we've just entered into an agreement with the Miami-Dade Water and Sewer Department. Now it seems like a funny thing for an aquatic ecologist to do, but in fact, our area is in need of about $32 billion of new infrastructure for drinking water and wastewater. We have very similar problems in Miami, to what Fernando explains to me. When we have the big flood events, it's not so much the water running down the hill or up from the ocean, it's the stormwater backup. It's the drains sort of spewing out water and creating more pollution from that way up. And so we're running into some significant challenges. And so the Miami-Dade Water and Sewer Authority actually came to us and said, we need help. We got to build this new infrastructure. How do we prioritize what we're going to build? And so it's going to be a really great collaboration. What's important to us is that most of their funding is going to be for graduate students. And most of it is going to be project by project. So they're going to set aside $5 million every few years for us, and then we're going to write project-based things, and present them to them. And if they like the ideas, if they feel like they help, then they'll fund those graduate students for some amount of time. And I can see some real possibilities for the exchange program that we've been talking about. They've also asked us to sort of help them with data collection and management. These kinds of things are real engineering challenges. So I'm kind of excited about that. Fernando had set up a meeting in France with their water authority, very similar to our water and sewer, and he's opened that conversation of, well, we have Rome, we have Miami, what about Paris, what about the Seine? And you showed that slide of the Seine River flooding. So perhaps there's an interesting sort of collaboration that can occur there. And then the Southeast Environmental Research Center, Rita talked a lot about that. That's part of one of the projects, well-known projects in that center is our Florida Coastal Everglades Long-Term Ecological Research Site. There are actually 26 of these sites around the U.S., Puerto Rico, Antarctica, and then there's one in the South Pacific. These are projects that are place-based, so there's a biome that we study for very long periods of time to try to understand how they operate and then what human impacts they're sort of doing in terms of long-term change. And so South Miami, South Florida is one of those projects. And it's a huge program that has funded lots of students. We have lots of collaborators, and it puts us in the heart of sort of helping to manage Everglade restoration. This is sort of a history. Rita showed a little bit of this. On the left is what the Everglades used to look like. The other thing that I think is interesting is with Fabio and Fernando and talk about sort of the coastal plains of Rome, it's basically a no gradient, no topography system. It's a hard hydrologic system. We're exactly the same. I mean, we have zero topography. Our highest point in South Florida is a landfill, right? It's like 14 feet or something like that. I mean, that's our highest point. So we also have the same issues with tough hydrologic modeling needs. And then, of course, we basically drained the Everglades, and now we're in the process of trying to restore it. Again, it's a tough problem when you're dealing with sheet flow, surface water, groundwater interactions, with no topography, no gravity to sort of guide you along in terms of that. As part of that, then, we are trying to use sort of green approaches to cleaning the water. One of our issues isn't just the amount of water, but it's the quality of the water. One of the things we've learned in the Everglades is that only a very little amount of phosphorus will completely screw up the Everglades system. The tipping point is very, very sensitive to phosphorus, and so we have these phosphorus limits. The problem is all the water that we have access to is from the north coming to the south. That's all agricultural land. It's all citrus farming, it's all sugar farming, and so, of course, they use lots of pesticides and lots of phosphorus and nitrogen. So our problem isn't just getting more water into the Everglades, but it's getting clean water into the Everglades. And so we've been working with South Florida Water Management District to try to build these artificial wetlands, to basically move water from the agricultural field to this wetland, let the plants and suck up the phosphorus and nitrogen, move it to the next one, suck up more phosphorus and nitrogen, and basically work its way through these stormwater treatment areas until we have clean water that we can release into the Everglades. So those are the kinds of things we're doing. And I think a lot of you are interested in sort of large-scale storm floods and stuff like that. There's a lot, I think, of really solid science that we need to be able to fully utilize these. Because if you think about it, we're sort of storing water and then trying to create a flood. Right? That's what we really do when we're trying to restore the Everglades. Asefa Melessa, a lot of you guys know Asefa. One of the other things we're supposed to be doing is helping, as we go through this restoration project, helping to quantify whether we're being successful or not. So one of the things we've done is we've tried to retrodict what the hydrologic regime must have looked like. We know what it looks like now, and in using that information, we're trying, as we try more and more management strategies, trying to predict what that restored hydrologic regime will look like. Of course, the goal is to make the far right look like the far left. And anywhere where you see yellow and red are places where we're failing, right? We want, everything should sort of be green, light green, and stuff like that. But Asefa and his group, Renee Price, are doing a lot of that modeling. And then along with that, again, I said phosphorus is really our critical indicator for whether or not we're going to be successful in Everglades restoration. So besides the hydrologic modeling, we're doing sort of a phosphorus and nutrient transport modeling. And again, you can see that we're not being very successful with that at all. And it's that problem of heavy agriculture where all of the water is coming down and then trying somehow to clean that. I mean, the huge breakthrough for us and a lot of places in the world associated with agriculture, eutrophication, is the phosphorus problem. Somehow, some way, somebody's going to figure out a technology that's going to allow us to strip out huge amounts of phosphorus in a very quick and an affordable way. That I think is one of the grandest challenges of global water security, especially as we find ourselves having to go into more and more intensive agriculture. Right? Rita mentioned our newest center. A year ago, we were fortunate to win a competition at the National Science Foundation and be awarded a Center of Excellence in Aquatic Chemistry and Ecotoxicology. That's a very large grant by U.S. standards even. It will provide funding for up to 50 PhD students over the next 5 to 6 years, and then it's renewable. So this is a 10-year program worth about $10 million US. And again, this is the center, the small center within the big institute that I suspect most of the exchange students would be collaborating with. That center is built on this aspect that we have the Everglades, this huge expanse of a wetland, but it's surrounded by agricultural areas and urban areas. And so we've got these transitions going back and forth, but the water just moves from one to the other, right? And so we have to understand those linkages and the challenges of water moving back and forth. This is the conceptual diagram we use to tie all of the science together that we do in this center. It's the food, energy, water nexus. You can't think about any one thing without thinking about those other two. And so whether you start with how do we maximize production of agricultural products, you then have to think about the water sources, what happens to the water you use, and the energy necessary to get the water there, to get the products out, right? So that sort of circular science is the way we kind of think about how to think about these complex problems. And so that center now has sort of 3 focuses. We've got a huge chemistry team that looks at detection and identification of all kinds of aquatic contaminants, emerging contaminants. We have one of the premier labs in terms of measuring pharmaceuticals and things at very, very low dosages. We continue to work on the technologies needed to sort of measure those things, again, a time early enough for it to be detection rather than reaction. We have a group that's the hydrologic modelers, the hydroecologists, so once we identify something, we need to understand where it moves, how it moves, and what happens to it along the way. And then we have folks who are trying to communicate that science through visualization approaches, through, I love somebody, who was it that was talking about taking, Fernando, taking 15 slides and making one tweet. I mean, we're trying to figure out how to take these really complicated databases and make them, provide them in terms of effective communication to people who really matter. And so that center has research in the Everglades and the mangroves and the shallow marine habitats, and our newest proposal, which is due in January, will be to concentrate completely on the urban environment. So we'll go completely to the urban fringe and understand sort of the food, energy, water nexus, but completely in that urban context. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Todd. I think it was very interesting for the workshop participants to get to know the entire research. You done that, thank you. I'm very excited about do real research together. My presentation, it will try to combine science and research to applications. We are developing the Warredoc. I think I mentioned this beginning of our presentation to thank also the Warredoc team member, Antonio Annis here, and Francisco Peña, the two that said are working on the flood modeling topic for the Tiber River, also other large-scale global application, and also Elena Quadri. There's a newcomer to the Warredoc. There's a funding scholarship as a postdoc from Fondazione Cassa di Risparmio of Perugia on water law. We really stress the fact that we like to be multidisciplinary, and Elena is working on water law for transboundary river basin management issues. Okay, let me try, because it's 4:30, to stay in time, and I will try to go fast, show you where I come from scientifically, where we're going. So, just stress the fact, research megawatt solutions. Also, we try to develop science that is converted to solutions that talk about the role of flood risk management projects and the scientific topic we're bringing now to new publication and new topics. I will try to address about floodplains and the water geomorphic footprint. That's why I was, when I read sediment fingerprint, it's close, okay? So, started more than 15 years ago, and new generation data about global digital elevation model came into play with a lot of powerful information, global data that were resolution 90 meters, now we have 30 meters global DTM. There's a new generation of topography from the satellite that's giving us so much that we still don't exploit all this information. So originally, what you can say that you have a LiDAR observation from the plane, and you don't just see the urban natural features. That's just spatial data that are 3D manipulation of the terrain, giving you not only this, but from the terrain, you see also the processes. You can see here where the landslide is, where the channel is, where the deposition is. It's more than just terrain. It's processes imprinted into the topography. So I will go fast in these slides. Come from terrain analysis. David Tarbotton's work was my source inspiration to do gravity control surface water that can be used with geospatial modeling for deriving hydrology features, stream network, and other data and processes used for hydrologic simulation, with a lot of issues. So I have like 15 slides of the issues that was part of the publication track. I won't tell you. These issues are still present in the new generation data about interpolation and vegetation. There are a lot of issues that you need to solve because you have different layers of information. You just don't have the topography and others. So the two main issues, and I want to put these slides, even if it's like, say basic science, because artificial depression are an issue because hydrologists need to have the water going up downstream. But the main issue is the flat areas. When it's flat, the gravity control doesn't work. So when you use geospatial modeling for
building your hydrology model, you have features that don't apply to the real world of hydrology. And so we work a lot, like 10 years of different research literature, also including myself. I have many of my publication here about how do we solve flat areas, because if it's flat, there is a zero slope channel, you don't know where the water is going. And that's an issue both upstream and also downstream. In the coast, this is the real thing, but in the upstream, we needed to find a solution, so we work with standard experimental models, implementing like landscape evolution modeling and putting this as a link between water and landscape that is still a part of the research, because landscape evolution has so much to tell us as information, so we use that information for correcting the DTM, the DT elevation model. And so a summary of standard experimental issues and pros and cons and etc., so that we started building scenarios in which like an artificial network could be corrected to represent real hydrology. I will skip this part, I won't go too much into detail, but it's still very important for us, this background, because it's gravity and energy control system, and we need to understand how the energy gradient is acting in this landscape. So if you have an hydrology system like an Ortonian basin, you have the landscape erosion and deposition, you know where the water should go. In a coastal, it's much more complex. That's why I'm so willing to work with Miami area, because there you have the ocean, you know the gradients, but you have to implement these in your science. From research to application, I developed this kind of research into the Tiber River projects for the indexing of the phenomena, because we need to understand how to do urban planning using terrain data and water modeling data. So some example of research, the use of scaling laws for geomorphic applications means that we use geomorphic scaling laws for understanding how the shape of the network is controlling the fluvial processes. Skipping this also too much information for short time, but this comes to the topic that is still active on our desks, is floodplain geomorphic footprint analysis. That was the first case and the first publication, the Rio Salado, done with New Mexico Tech colleagues and New Mexico, and also part of Arizona, I believe. And then the application of the geomorphic footprint on the Paul River Basin, just to show that this model is very simple and numerically you can run it at any scale, and that's not a flood. That's why we put it in green and on blue. It's a geomorphic footprint using a simplified hydrology and just the digital elevation model. And that's the comparison, because as an understanding what we're simulating between the floodplain using the geomorphology and the flood hazard map from the regional authority. We develop application comparing how do these floodplain geomorphic tools work as respect to kind of FEMA or Italian flood maps. And they make sense. So if you see the blue boundary, is the boundary that is connecting to the shaded picture of Orazio Carpenzano, no, because this model cannot work when we are in the big flat of the landfill, the reclamation plant. And if you see the model in this application, I'm praising that part, the yellow, just to give you the picture. That's the footprint of the floodplain for the Tiber River. And that's the floodplain footprint for the city of Rome, which Rome is like you see on the upper right. Seems to be no fluvial shape because it's fully building. But if you see the digitalization model, you see the footprint. The yellow with the flood hazard zone because we have Libis, the famous Muraglioni in Rome. But the blue, the green footprint still works because if you compare this data with the issue of urban flooding by the sewer, by the backwater effect in the infrastructure, you still catch the footprint, because water tend to go towards the low-lying areas. We apply this for hydrology modeling. I will just go fast now, using terrain data for geomorphic hydrology modeling, and some application developed for the Minister of Environment at the time and the Tiber River Authority, building an Italian interface for implementing these tools for the Italian global floodplain map, and some applications, because I stress that fact about trying to do science and then fundraising for bringing solutions to the table also. So that's part of the research. What we call also the Smart Water Optimal Risk Management platform. And these tools that Antonio Annis brought to new life, because we're programmed with the old GIS code, and Antonio brought it to Python. It's actual work. And again, the last 2 years we're trying to refresh the science and the codes to make those available for the agencies. So that's Umbria region and the floodplain model, and that's upper river basin and the flow path and land. So urban land engineering. There's an application on Puglia region, the southeast of Italy, in which you have an amazing, intense road infrastructure intersecting with the rivers to prioritize which has the most dangerous and critical culvert to be replaced by the region. So that's the same issue as the Miami-Dade agent, to prioritize it because we are thousands and thousands of intersections, which are the ones we need to fix before. So this was brought to the Rome Flood Risk Management Project, and no time for showing the entire project. It's an applied research. This is the new flood hazard mapping, updating project for the city of Rome. You see the 2D dimensional model, hydraulic modeling developed for developing the flood hazard zones. But go back to the science, we had an issue that was not a scientific issue. The agency had 1/10 of the budget that was needed for the topography and the bathymetry. So we needed to develop a methodology for taking into account that we couldn't survey all the rivers. So how do we prioritize this? So we built a simplified modeling approach to do the field surveying only when needed. If the channel is too small for the big flood, we don't want to know the channel because it doesn't convey much of the flood. But if the flood that is conveyed by the river, we need to know the river. So just again make this story short. And that's a combination of the flood hazard mapping with the floodplain model. Because we have for the main river the flood hazard detailed model, but then you have the possibility with the geomorphic footprint to extend information to the tributaries. And there was also a recent publication about the topic, how do we analyze to do inundation models with floodplain modeling and use the geomorphic information for understanding the issues. And if you compare the geomorphic information with the fluvial issues, you come out with there is a strong correlation between the culvert collapse or sinkholes to where the water tend to accumulate. And you don't need to have complex information because the topography will tell you much of what you need to know. And some other analysis for the city of Rome demonstrating that's a thing that is global for mega cities, that the unit discharge that for hypothesis should decrease downstream because the larger the river, the peak flood should decrease. In the urbanized cities, the peak flow increases downstream because of the increase of the urbanization with the flat areas. More is flat, more is urbanized. In the hills, you don't want to develop because it's too costly and also because you don't reach the hills. Okay. Another, results of the flood risk modeling plan. That's the Ostia Fiumicino area, the Canale. That's the 2D model of the area that this is both coming eventually from the river, but most of these 2D model results are linked to the urban flooding, rainfall induced. That's the area we were yesterday taught, and that's the results of the Tiber River model for the Zaniene River and another part of the domain, and that's the coastal area again. Other engineering application, there's an actual Warredoc funded project for this Stadio della Roma. Is a critical project because I want to develop a large infrastructure within the meandering part of the river. So we are developing the same skills to understand where the water should be drained because it's completely flat. And the issues are many. The project is kind of also critical because we have all the Roman bridges and you cannot touch them, so the flow is actually, we know where should build, but we cannot also do this because there are some archaeological constraints, there's another topic we discussed about where in Italy. And other results of the project, and also the fact that our original studies and modeling and hydrology and hydraulics are now coming to real works. That's a redesign of the confluence of a river, a tributary of the Tiber system. That was finally, after the project was delivered, the design in 2012, they finished the redesign of the confluence using the geomorphic and fluvial approach. Because if you disconnect the confluence, the tributary, from the main river, you can have less impact of the flood downstream. I like to put this just to show how research then comes into practice. Actual topic now about still the floodplain topic, the geomorphic footprint, and do this globally, also given new DTM, new data, and better model using GIS and pilot scripting. The Wabash watershed, we have an ongoing collaboration with EPA about this. That's the African river, and that's the entire Africa, the floodplain footprint, just to give you an idea what we mean for big data science and data analytics. Because you have the floodplain footprint, and you can know how much people live in the floodplain, how much agriculture. That's something just to share. It's not published yet, but we're working on about this. And also some ecology application. I put this like last minute. We discussed, we thought about this. What we mean for ecology applications is my last slide. I hope I was taking time. Couple of concepts that I just summarized in a concept flowchart of the last slide. How the flood pools, that is governing the ecology of the floodplains, is giving shape of what we have in low-lying areas. Because when there is a river draining downstream, the energy of the water is an order of magnitude of the other energies, animals, plants. But in the last 2 months I've been studying this publication about these ecology people, that's what I mean for ecology, that they have energy control system given to animals and plants and diffusion terms that are shaping the earth. So if you go in low-lying areas, you should what, I mean, I'm trying to convert this ecology application into the floodplain model that I did in this plot, in which the geomorphic and fluvial work done upstream, where the water is the main force. When you go downstream, when you go to the coast, the other forces are the same level, like animals and others, and also are the humans, because when there is a human and then the cause of all humans, you should study those as at the same level of the ecologic studies. I think I was in time. I rushed a lot of information, but I wanted to put this slide also for future record. So we shared this, and it was for me the way to share the research we did and the research we are doing with the team. Okay, I'm done. Thank you. So I'm tired.
So I have a question for Elena. When you're doing you show the thing where you guys are trying to capture the fog. Is it possible that you will get so good at that there might be ramifications for things like mosses and plants and stuff? I mean, I know there are a lot of organisms that actually get most of their water through the atmosphere, through fog and stuff like that. Is anybody thinking about sort of those kinds of interactions?
In terms which is the effect of this micro
Taking the fog, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this would be a kind of research that we would like to work on. What we got from our project that it's already 20 years that finished actually, so we didn't have the possibility for continuing in Peru, but now we are starting some other places like Turkey and Chile. Is that we don't need for a long time the fog collectors because everything is there, can capture and can catch rain. So even green, even very small shrubs can sustain and then can improve the environment. So just for the beginning, for the 2 or 3 years, we use the fog collectors for feeding through irrigation these plots, but then
Once you got the green structure back, okay.
And we discovered that one plot that was not equipped with the irrigation obviously died. Okay, so all the shrubs died, but all the others with different treatments survived with a different level of growth, but they survived. So I think it's very powerful way for maybe ecosystem restoration. Obviously, there are some sites where you can go on with that, not all over the world.
Yeah.
So I think that for sharing the slides and information, and as I said before, I really like to develop a report together what we're doing so we can share more information. Also, other people that couldn't come to Perugia today, they're willing to collaborate, they will read what we sharing information, but for delivering a work plan to the agencies and to the other potential partners. It's something that I will take the lead. I know Todd and Fabio will help.
Fernando, if we have a few minutes, I mean, a lot of people here presented, but a lot of people didn't.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of, I'd be interested in sort of hearing from your perspectives. I mean, we talk among each other a lot. And so I'd be interested in hearing from you guys, you know, where do you see the best ways forward? And if you tell us there wasn't a single thing that excited you today, that'll be okay. We
Yeah,
can know that.
absolutely. Actually, I'm sorry because I know almost everyone. But Luca, go ahead.
Aspettiamo che
No,
inizi.
tranquillo. Te la senti in inglese o in italiano se vuoi? In inglese oggi?
Aspettiamo Naz.
Okay, so there is Giulio and I don't remember the Beatrice. So let's,
So actually, I have two questions. So,
yeah, sure.
and the first one is for Professor Nardi. That I'm really interested by the thing of mapping the drainage network in flat areas because you're working with GIS. That's one of the main points you do. So I mean, I would be very interested in more details. So I think I will go through the papers. And the question is, which is the impact of this? So. Which is the difference that you have found by modeling with the traditional methodologies and these, I believe, energy-based drainage network mapping that you developed?
I mean, it's a complex question, no? It's because it's a huge difference. Because flat areas are technical issue, given that most of the basins are theoretically connected from the boundaries to the outlet, but in real it doesn't apply. You have a lot of valleys that the water usually fill and go. So this filling thing that we studied a lot was a lake that is part of the model, but is really not working. So this is changing the hydrology dynamics, because hydrology modeling takes out the time of the raindrop from upstream to downstream. So if you do standard modeling, just to give you an example, that different replies to your question. If you use standard modeling and you want to know easy, because from the topography you can know in 2 minutes with the GIS to the analysis how much time takes for the flood from upstream to downstream, with a simple assumption on the surface flow velocity, that there are many formulas in the literature, you may be wrong by 500%, just to give you a number. The flood from Umbria to Rome can come in 6 hours or 3 days, and both numbers are correct from the standard GIS. And if you go into the type of flood plan, they do wrong assumptions for this, because they have developed methodology based on observations, but observations are always very complex because the flood can come from different, is a big basin. So just to give you what's the impact of the flood connecting to the GIS. And there's a time of concentration, well-known issue, and others. That's for the surface water, but actually that is applied to all it depends on the scale of the model. But we can definitely work on this also. Antonio technically, also scientifically, is working on the tools, and there's a very good point of connection because it's we're now a big part of our work. So thank you for your.
And I of course, I will have more questions.
Go ahead.
Second question is for Professor Castelli, that we discussed about the difficulty of applying green infrastructure planning in cities.
Yes.
We did a recent application about green infrastructure development, but in another kind of environment. Bolivia, in which you have very degraded landscapes and watershed. And I was thinking about, okay, it's true that we cannot apply green infrastructure paradigm in a very rigid city system. But what about applying better green infrastructure tools at watershed level?
Yeah, it was sort of comment in the last slide.
Thank you, Razio. Grazie.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Ciao.
Sometimes, the rigidity extends to a more complex cultural landscape. Okay, so it really means what you mean by applying green infrastructure. I mean, I think
It really needs a lot of interdisciplinary effort. It's not something that you can design in paper and say, okay, this is the right approach everywhere and so forth. It really requires a lot of case-specific understanding. Another thing is what I believe is the true strength, or one of the true strengths of certain approach to a diffuse use of green infrastructure is somehow revealed in the common perception of the landscape, the importance of this functionality. Like people think that, in using the landscape and participating where possible to the planning of the use, I think that the certain problem of distance, okay, something that someone else has to deal with. Okay? So there is really no permeation about this problem when there is participation of communities to land planning. I think that green infrastructure is easy, facilitate a lot this kind of permeation. I think it's in a sense an important role, even where they cannot be at the end that effective.
Yes. Yeah, that's more or less the same thing that we experience in Bolivia, because we have this watershed in which there were new urbanization plan in let's see, groundwater research area, and that was an Italian development cooperation agency project. So actually what we did is that we traveled with the pickup towards this area in which the new urbanization were planned. We see by our eyes that the soil was sandy, and we go through discussing with the local municipalities which was the problem, and they explain and they reinforce our guessing about that. And then we implement the model, including also the area, and we discovered that actually that was the problem. So we modeled the urbanization, and the urbanization would create a lot of problems. So that's why we have a good suggestion how to implement green infrastructure in that case by local population, more or less. This was the experience, actually.
Other comments we have? Any?
Well, I'm not an engineer or a technician, so for me everything is very interesting, but I don't have the preparation to ask something more specific. I was very interested in the first presentation about the programs you already developed in Florida and international cooperation programs, and I think that might be a lot of possibility to cooperate also with ISPRA, for example. Giuseppina is always open to new possibilities. So
I hope that with ISPRA, ISPRA is also in charge of collecting the data at the Italian scale for the different risks. All the monitoring data from the region goes to ISPRA as a central system, so it's really, of course, a good partner for what we're doing. So, and the major platform they mentioned, the data component is important, like globally. So I think it's good for you on board. Yes, Elena is our water law. I stress this. There's water law.
I have a question for Professor Castelli.
Sure. Well.
In the context of 2007 flood directive, what is your opinion about the public participation to mitigate, to prevent, to help to prevent and mitigate flooding?
It's a very an issue with the capital I like this big. Okay, I mean today focus, as I try also to point out, is a lot on what is called the last mile of civil protection. Okay, in Italy we have a very complex and modern system of civil protection that starts from a central government coordination down to a central law in city majors in issuing alarms and so forth. And all this part of the chain work more or less, I would say, very well. What is really become the weak point is the system works and what is the difference of being defended by structural measures and non-structural measures. Expectation is a law that if you do a structural intervention, that will solve the problem. Okay? And something is difficult to bring in the system is to have people to realize that communities you can solve that problem for them in terms of for them being passive up to a given point. Okay? When I was in a public debate two weeks ago in the Warredoc event, I used the parable of a pie that you cut in half. Okay? Then the pie is the flat piece. Each new plan you do, you digest. This is a very heavy to digest pie. You digest half of them, okay? And then you make a new intervention and you digest another half. But each half that remains, okay, you take the same effort than the previous one. You never end eating all the pie. Okay? But that's, I think, is still something that is very hard to have communities to be involved, effectively involved in this kind of business. And I think that is where we are lagging behind.
Yeah, I think we have the same issue actually, even after like a big hurricane. If people don't get that the mangroves help protect you, the sand dunes help protect you, they are so focused on build us a wall or the hard structures that we need to also educate on the value of those and maintaining those, and we're really working hard on that. The combined solutions, I think.
From a psychologist, this kind, said that you need to break what they call homeostaticity of risk. In the sense that anytime you reduce the hazard part of risk, you tend to increase the exposure. Okay? And this is where you need a lot of involvement of communities. You don't bring this sort of homeostaticity. Every time you build a bigger baby, people say, okay, then I'm safer, I'll build new buildings. And you will never end.
Yeah. That's a cultural problem we discussed, even again, I'm a civil and hydraulic engineer, so for me civil works should be the bread that I eat every day. In this moment, I'm stressed today, 1 billion infrastructure, civil works for the coastal, we should be happy. A lot of works, a lot of concrete. But I have the feeling it's not the way to go for many different ways. So it's 10 years ago that I studied engineering 10 years ago, and they told me that there are dams, levees, that they were not learned. And even as science is going very forward in green and circular economy, a lot of paradigm, if you talk to the agencies, if you talk to general professional engineering, even advanced, biggest engineering in the world, will still think that water control is gray solutions. They will never, this is a cultural thing, it's also a business issue, because green is not really, marketable, sometimes for some of the actors, but I don't want to go to this discussion, it's just a matter of culture, how we do green, and also the cultural part. I'm a lily, close to me, I'm safe. And this is not true. Also in cultural terms, in the Ostia Fiumicino area, we only have 1 people that died because of the flood, because it went, when there was a big rainfall, not huge, he went down in the basement to get something, and was with the water just drowned. That's a simple example that you may have a wet feet. It's not a problem. That there are many different problems, but for safety of humans, that would be hard to convince the local authorities to invest billions there, because there are 1 dead in the last 10 years, and what's the problem? That you get wet. That's most similar to Miami, when you need to talk to politics, taking decision, and they ask you, okay, you want the money for the studies, then you want money for what is for? What's going to be the, in terms of citizen? That's something that is both engineering and all the other disciplines, cultural and communication, and then policy making. That it will be complex to cover the entire cycle, but I think our effort goes towards this multidisciplinary. So
But I think that was, I really like the way Elena talked about the research hotspots. I mean, I think that's one. And
Yeah.
that's maybe more than one. That's all.
Okay.
Research
That's
hotspots.
under the train station because.
Okay, rush.
Okay, now we have finished. We are
Sorry.
Thank you, everybody.